You really look pretty today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TSA Conference 2020, Storytelling in the Time of Corona. This is the workshop for music and creativity to enrich storytelling with Dr. Trudy Hanson. So I hope you're all in the right place. The first thing we always start out with is a little housekeeping, right? So you're in your own homes or your own spaces. So I'm sure you know where the bathrooms are and where you need to go if you need to get a drink of water. So I will leave that part up to you. We are going to have a presentation style workshop for you today. And so we're going to go all the way through it. But if there are questions that come up during the presentation, I want you to put them in the chat. And if you will start your question with a capital letter Q, so we will know that they're questions and not just high fives or way to go or, this is great kind of thing. And so at the end, we're going to take about 10 to 15 minutes and go over those questions, and we'll read them to Dr. Hanson, and she will answer them for you as well. So also, you are going to have 4 handouts during this workshop. Those will be available for you to download from the chat. If you're having any problems downloading them, address those questions to tech. You can start those questions with the word tech or the capital letter T. And that way they can make sure that they address those questions for you. So without any more ado, I am going to introduce y'all to me. My name is Shayne Larango, and I am a member of the Dallas Storytelling Guild and the Tejas Storytelling Association. This summer, I started a YouTube series called Storyteller Stories, where I interview storytellers about their motivation and why they tell stories, and I think it's fascinating. So I hope you check that out. But today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Trudy Hanson. And Dr. Hanson and I actually go way back. We met at the Texas Speaking Association, organization that promotes public speaking and communication studies. Dr. Hanson has directed the WT Storytelling Festival at West Texas A&M University since 1991. And each spring, graduate students produce and perform the festival, which features nationally recognized tellers. And some of these names you might recognize because the guest tellers have included Joe Hayes, Elizabeth Ellis, Tom McDermott, David Holt, Karma Dede, Bill Harley, Barbara McBride Smith, and Tam Tingle. Dr. Hanson teaches an undergraduate storytelling class that features a unit about music and creativity. And as part of their performance assignment, students are encouraged to incorporate musical cues into their storytelling performances. This workshop is a reflection of that. It presents ideas of using a variety of instruments, kazoos, glockenspiels, rain sticks, into storytelling performances. So I would like to give us a hand to welcome Dr. Trudy Hanson. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Shayne. I am really excited to be able to visit with you for this workshop and share some ideas, as Shayne has said, that I use in my undergraduate storytelling class. For one of their storytelling assignments, they are given a folktale, and they have to dramatize the folktale. They have to come up with roles. There is a script involved. Sometimes it's loosely followed, but as part of that assignment, they have to add sound that reflects some of the language or some of the movement. So let me share this PowerPoint with you, and it will kind of guide us through our discussion today. Just a minute. Okay. I'm having problems getting it to show on the screen. Okay. All right. Is that visible, Shayne? Okay.
Yeah.
So these are our objectives. You know, as an educator, that's how you're always supposed to start. I wondered that before, but I follow my own advice. So what we're going to talk about is the rhythm of our language. Sometimes we don't think about that. We associate rhythm with music, but not when we speak. And actually, all language has rhythm. The other thing that we're going to do is make the connection between music and creativity and storytelling. How you can add something to your stories, make them more meaningful, make them more suspenseful. And then we're going to implement the use of a variety of rhythm instruments in our storytelling performances. Again, you will see some of the ones that I have brought for you. I usually start this session, and if we indeed were doing this face-to-face, you would all have one of these instruments I'm going to show you in your hands. And we would start with the rhythm of our names. In other words, every name has a rhythm. And usually I start with wooden sticks, they're also called claves, and we would go around the room and you would play the rhythm of your name. So if your name was Sally, you would go Sally. That's pretty easy. If your name was Katrina, it would be Katrina. You get the idea. This works with very young children all the way to adults because, of course, obviously, I use this with college age. So the first concept is to understand that your name has rhythm and the language that you use in telling a story has rhythm. The other thing that's important to remember is that beat plays a part too. In repeated refrains, there is a beat that you follow, and there's a rhythm of that repeated refrain. You can make the beat go faster, like your heart goes faster if you suddenly see a snake or something. Your heart speeds up, but the space between the beats stays the same. So that's the constant part of that. And so we talk a little bit about that and the importance of rhythm. So again, if we were face to face and we were doing this together, you would take your handy dandy claves and we would go through a series of rhythms. The picture that you see in front of you is a picture of Shinichi Suzuki. It has nothing to do with motorcycles. He was a member of a Japanese family who owned a violin factory. But in fact, he did not start playing violin until he was a young adult. And at that time, he traveled to Germany to study with some of the best violinists. And of course, he spoke Japanese, they spoke German. And he was very frustrated. He thought the German language was the hardest language to speak. Obviously, I would think Japanese would be the hardest language to speak. And he, as he would travel to his lessons, see mothers with their children boarding the bus or getting on the bus, and he would hear 3-year-olds just speak perfect German. So he developed what he called the mother tongue method. In other words, you don't sit down with a 6-month-old and say, today we're going to learn English. You just talk to the child, and the child, because of the surroundings they're being brought up in, learns the language that way. So he applied that idea to music, particularly folk music. And he chose a variety of folk tunes that became part of the repertoire that he used in teaching very young violinists. But all of that starts with the basics of rhythm. And so when you sit these 3-year-olds down, you give them some wooden sticks, and then you teach them these rhythms. And I'm just going to show you these quickly. Again, if you were in my class, you would actually tap out these rhythms And all of these become the basis of playing Bach's double violin concerto for two violins. So the first rhythm is easy. Taka, taka, stop, stop. Again, you think of the movement, you hear the sound, you hear the rhythm. The next one is a little tricky, and this is the one that the 3-year-olds I often work with have the most trouble with. It's 1, 2, sh, 4. But when you get to the sh, you shush, you don't say anything. So it's 1, 2, 4. And if you're 3-year-olds, usually this is what happens. 1, 2, 4. So to signal that, again, I would do 1, 2, 4. And after several weeks, finally, we get in the rhythm and everybody remembers the shush. Well, that was Dr. Suzuki's second rhythm. The third rhythm, and these, of course, are given English phrases. He called them something else, but this is what American Suzuki teachers use, and that is stop, pony, stop, pony. Now, for a minute, let's go back to the first rhythm so you can see the difference. Taka, taka, stop, stop. Now, stop, pony, stop, pony. The fourth rhythm, Mississippi is a river, is one where you need to use small movements. This reflects 8 notes, and it's very tiring. It sounds like this. Mississippi is a river. Mississippi is a river. And you play that for the whole twinkle variation because all of these are set to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Now, one that was added recently, several years ago, but more recently than when Dr. Suzuki developed his folklore and folk music resources, was lollipop. And this represents triplets. And again, that's a kind of an advanced concept, but if you teach it early, just like a child hears his or her native language, then they understand that too. So it's lollipop, lollipop, which is different than stop, pony, stop, pony. And finally, you get to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the theme. And when you play the theme, again, you use your rhythm, and it would be twinkle, twinkle, little star. And again, you're playing the rhythm of the last variation when you do that. So basic rhythms, and you say, how does that relate to storytelling? Well, remember, all of our language has a rhythm. And another concept that I teach along with the idea that of those rhythmic concepts is the Mozart effect. If you think back to perhaps some news reports you may have heard back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of interest in some research that had been conducted in California. It was labeled the Mozart effect. And what these researchers did, they had 3 test groups. One heard a portion of a Mozart sonata. It was a piano piece. Another just heard some music that was supposed to relax. I kind of think of it probably as being like elevator music. And then the third group just had silence. And what the researchers did, they gave these students a pretest. It was a short IQ test, and then exposed them to those 3 listening conditions that I've just described, and then they retested them. Well, what they found was that the group that listened to Mozart, and of course they weren't coached, the music just played, and they were taking the test when the music played, they scored from 8 to 10 points higher than the other 2 groups. And this particular research served as the basis for looking at the effect that classical music had on our brains. And what was decided is the way that our brains work and the different intervals that have to cross and make connection in our right and left brain are affected by the complex harmonies of classical music. And that's to say that we shouldn't dismiss even using sound effects in storytelling for the effect that it might have. A case in point, one of the favorite stories that I like to show my students is the performance of Monkey Takes a Ride by Alice McGill. This is from a series, a multicultural series that was recorded years ago. And if you've seen Alice McGill perform that, she talks about it being really, really hot. And the heat waves were going jibbity, jibbity, jibbity. And she makes this action and she does that sound, of course, using that rhythm, jibbity, jibbity, jibbity. Students listen to the story. I have them draw a storyboard because that's one way to learn a story. But at the end of the semester, the one story they remember is Monkey Takes a Ride. And I asked them why, and they said, well, it's because of the jibbity, jibbity, jibbity. So if you want your story to be memorable, think of, transfer the information we have about music in our brains and the Mozart effect to telling your story. Now, the other thing, and this conversation I have with my students, sometimes they say, are you really sure? And I am really sure. What they found in another study, there was a group of students in a lower income section of this particular school district in California. And what they did for those students got weekly keyboard lessons. And again, that was using the same kind of muscle memory that happens with listening to Mozart. What happened for that particular group, they scored, even though they were second graders, at a fourth grade level after a semester of keyboard music. And that was the same level as from a very high performing, very high economic neighboring school district. What was the difference? The difference was the way their brains were processing what they heard. And in the case of the Mozart effect, it's not long lasting is what they have found, but what it does, it improves the spatial reasoning. And of course, spatial reasoning has a part in math. And so those kind of things can have a long-term effect. And what I laughingly tell my students, so if you're bad in math, what you need to do is take piano lessons. I don't think anybody's taken me up on that. So what are some of our options to add to our storytelling? Well, one of my favorites, and these come in a variety of different styles. Usually my younger students that I work with at my church just call this the fish. But this is a great instrument to use for creaky doors. Or if you want it to be a sharp sound that perhaps makes your audience jump, it works really great for that. So the gyro is a fun instrument to use in a variety of different settings. Another instrument that this is especially fun for, again, all ages, is a kabasa. And again, this can be part of the story. It can be tied to a character. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that sound adds interest as well. And we've already talked about claves. That's wooden sticks. The claves is a fancy name for it. These one of them has a ridged edge here. The other is smooth. But of course, I usually just use them like this rather than like this. But you can use them in the same way that you use the gyro for a sound effect. Now, a glockenspiel, and I know that you're looking at this and you say, well, that looks like a xylophone. It's not. It's a glockenspiel. And the difference in the xylophone that you can get from Fisher-Price and the glockenspiel is that these particular tones are the same as you're going to find on your piano. And they're fun to use in storytelling, particularly if you look at the story and it talks about something going up or something coming down. And so if there's the repeated action, every time it goes up, you can use your glockenspiel. And when it comes down, you can use that. And that adds interest, but it also makes the action memorable. Now, this is not an instrument, but you will see them at storytelling festivals. You'll find them in the resources I got thunder cubes for all of my grandkids, and that was a thunderous occasion, I can tell you. But this is usually the favorite sound effect that my students choose. So if you have a crash or if you have a thunderstorm, and depending on the age of your audience, you can make it be a gentle thunder, or you can make it be a crashing thunder. I found if you start with a crash and your audience is really young, sometimes their reaction is not so positive because it really does sound like thunder, and some of them are bothered by that. But it's fun to add to your story. If you haven't used a rain stick before, the rain stick is really a fun instrument too. I think it's particularly good for spine tingling type things. Oh, and I should go back. I think Brooke, one of our technical assistants, has uploaded. There's a handout about the Mozart effect that talks about a few of the research studies that I've talked about. You'll see that over in the chat section. And while she's doing that, the next thing that I would like you to see, and you can download this at your leisure, is The Night Before Halloween. This is a script that's written out based on a children's book that already has sound cues for all of the instruments that I hand out for the kids to use. It can be used in a school setting, but it also can be used as you tell a story for a performance. You have to cue in the students if they are non-readers. But if they're readers, it's really great because then they learn story sequence, and they're waiting, of course, to be able to use a rain stick for whatever particular effect in the story. Now we're going to talk about kazoos in more detail later. There's also a handout that has to do with kazoos. But right now, I just want to talk about how you can, if you don't have any of this other stuff, you're not interested in any of these things, the one thing you can take away today is the impact you can have with just a simple kazoo. You'll blow into the wide end, and it's not like playing a trumpet or playing a clarinet. You hum, and that becomes the sound. So when you need a sound effect, and we'll do some sound effects a little bit later in the workshop, but if you needed a siren, you only have, it's just right there with you, and you can add different sound effects. One of my student groups was performing the Paperback Princess this past week, and they needed a trumpet sound or a sound of a royal welcome. So they all got out their kazoos, and they were kind of different pitches all at one time, but it worked so far as the story is concerned. So the kazoo is a really fun thing to add to your performances. Also, if you need the sound of a knocking door, a tonal drum is really a good choice. This particular drum comes from Uruguay, and you'll see it has different tones, different pitches here. So you can use it to knock on a door, but you also can use it to make the sound of, let's say, horses' hooves or a clock. So the tonal drum can be used in a number of different stories, fairy tales, folk tales. Again, you'll find in a variety of venues little frogs. This one, I think, has a really nice sound. When you play it, and I tell my students this, when you play it, you're going to have the frog facing you, and then you stroke his back. And depending on the size of the frog and the material, the wood that it's made from, it will have a different pitch. And this is one of my favorites. It's very small, but it does the job. And just as you have frogs, you have crickets. So at WT, the theater department is having to change its production schedule, obviously because of coronavirus. And so their first production this semester was a radio play, which they performed in the theater, but then they live streamed it, so there wasn't an audience. And they needed sound effects. And so John Landon, the technical director, called me up and he said, "Hey, have you got something that sounds like a cricket?" And I said, "I just happen to have something." This sound is a little different than the frog. And as you look for folk tales or stories to add to your repertoire, many of them have those kind of sounds that you can add. So that's a fun instrument to add. Now, boom whackers, I can't see everyone that is attending right now, but I'm sure that some of you have used boom whackers before. If you haven't, let me explain. These are plastic hollow tubes, there's nothing there. And just like the glockenspiel, they are tuned the same way as the frequency you hear on your piano. But the best part, even my college students like this, it doesn't take great skill to play because the most resonant part of your body is your head. Some people say it's because it's the emptiest. So you tune your boom whacker by just simply bumping your head. Now, of course, you can hit your hand, but you hear that sound isn't nearly as nice as this one. You can order the basic set of a scale, 8 boom whackers, and then you can also get additional ones that are in the chromatic scale, sharps and flats. Now, when we get to how to use these, I'll show you one of the stories that we use boom whackers for. But that's always a crowd pleaser. Again, doesn't matter the age. Handbells are another thing I keep in my supply of instruments. And when I'm working with really young children, I explain you need to hold this like an ice cream cone, and your hand should not touch the colored part. And we talk a little bit about making the sound that would be pleasing and not a clunky sound. So I demonstrate that if I touch this part, the bell is really clunky. But if I do this, then the sound goes on and on. And you say, well, how could you use that? Well, let's say that you're going to start your story, and maybe, in this case, I'm going to show you an example, that you are showing the story of Jingle Bells. Well, you'll make a chart that looks like this. You'll color code it because each of the tubes, our bells, are colored. And so the children will play, even if they cannot read the lyrics, they will know the color. And you just move your finger along, and voila, you have an instant chorus that joins in as part of your story. And it can be a really effective introduction. Now, in my collection, I'm always looking for sounds that can add interest, sounds that can emphasize a character. This African seed shaker not only looks interesting, but it sounds interesting. And it comes in handy for some of the African American stories I tell. But perhaps my favorite is the stir xylophone. And if you haven't used one of these, I would encourage you to try it, because this is what happens. And I can't think of a better sound to indicate a spell or an action. And so the stir xylophone ends up usually being a favorite of my students when they're performing. And it's one of the sound effects that they will add to their stories. Now, The next handout that you're going to see in the chat is the languages of storytelling. This is from Donald Davis, and you'll recognize him as a very respected teller from the very beginning of the National Storytelling Network. He has performed at the National Storytelling Festival. He has written a book called Writing as a Second Language, and I often refer to that when I talk to my students. We talk about storytelling, and then we talk about writing, and we use the example of Donald Davis. What Donald Davis figured out, he was doing a residency a long time ago, I think it was in Georgia, and the children were conversing, and the teacher came in and told them to all be quiet, they needed to be learning. And he thought, well, that's what they're doing, they're talking. And he began to realize that when we think about writing, you can't write until you can picture the story in your mind. And so he began to think, well, you know, in storytelling, we really do have different languages. And he talked about the language of gesture, but the one that we're focusing on today is the language of sound. And so for him, he talked about not only what I mentioned before, the rhythm of language, and cues that signal a character's entrance or exit, or signal something is going to happen. That happens with the way we say things often. And so language of sound is one of the languages that we should make more use of in our storytelling. He talks about language of attitude, language of audience feedback, and then also language of words. And you say language of words, he means that in cases where your audience is just listening to you, they can't see your face, they can't see your gestures, then you have to use more words to describe what's happening or the action that takes place. And with these 5 languages, you become aware of how to make your story more effective. But particularly, we're focusing today on the language of sound. So, we ask ourselves when to use sound or rhythm. So these are some suggestions of where you can put those into your storytelling. Again, I'm going to give you some examples, specific examples from a variety of folk tales. So you can use sound or rhythm as part of a repeated refrain. And you saw that with Mary Blue's Spoons, the clickety-clack story that was at last night's storytelling concert. When there's a repeated refrain, you can add that instrument and the rhythm that you want to illustrate that. Now, sometimes a story suggests a sound. So in the script that is included as a handout, the night before Halloween, there are certain suggestions. Again, there's the direction up and down. So the glockenspiel can be used for that. There's the a signal for the witch. So it can also, the sound can be used to identify a character. It's a way to show emotion also. If in the particular story, again, there's the climax, the movement of something, that could be where the boom happens, where you introduce the thunder cube. And obviously, in different settings, it's a way to engage the audience. With my college students, all of these instruments that I've shown you today are put in front on a table. They pick one up as they go to their seats. We tell the story, and they always can hardly wait till it's their time to play. And it doesn't matter if you do this technique with third graders or with college seniors. They still enjoy engaging in that way. So when we can get back together after Corona, I would encourage you to use that. So here are some examples I want to show you. This is one of my favorite folk tales, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with it, Kanehito. Kanehito is about a little bunny who goes to see his tia Monica. And there's just one problem. As he goes up the mountain to visit his tia Monica, he's accosted by three animals, which are all hungry and which all want to eat him. Senor Zorro, Senor Tigre, and Senor Leon. And so to outwit them, tia Monica, at the end of the summer, when it's time for Kanehito to return home, she says, Kanehito, we will put you inside a barrel. And so as the story goes, tia Monica puts him in a barrel and he rolls down the mountainside. And of course, he's going to bump right into Senor Tigre. So this is a great place to introduce the stir xylophone. So when you get to down the mountainside he rode, rodando, 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 and then add the wooden drum for when he bumps into Senor Tigre or Senor Leon. That repeated refrain happens, and of course the other part of that refrain is, the mountain's on fire and you will be too. You'd better run now or you'll be barbecue. And so when you tell that story, again, you keep the rhythm of the phrase, but you introduce the musical sounds to help add interest. Now, Anansi and the moss-covered rock is one of the African tales that all of you have heard. Anansi, of course, is a trickster. And this story has a variety of different sound effects that you can add. But I think the language itself, the writer in recording this story, gives you some cues of what sounds would be like. So when Anansi finds this strange moss-covered rock, he understands that it has a magical effect. Because if you say, isn't that a strange moss-covered rock, you fall down unconscious. Well, one of the best things, and again, no matter the age of your audience, they really like this part. So instead of saying kapam, which is part of the story, you just use the boomwhacker. Down fell elephant. And of course, in the story, Anansi takes all of his friends, elephant, a giraffe, but he's outwitted at the end by little mule deer, who has been watching from afar and understands what happens when you say, isn't that a strange moss-covered rock? But that open sound that the boomwhacker gives is a fun way to bring Anansi to life. The Paperback Princess. This story, of course, is a version of Cinderella, but not of a Cinderella that needs very much help. In this case, Elizabeth was a beautiful princess, and so when you tell the story, you can add the finger symbols every time you refer to princess, or even when you say Elizabeth. So if you were using this for that story, you'd say, Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. And so as the story goes on, every time you say Ronald, you can use the wooden frog. Because, of course, as we find at the end of the story, Ronald is a bum. Because Elizabeth gives her all. This dragon comes in, takes Ronald captive, and flies away in the forest, and burns everything, including her clothes. So all she has left is a paper bag. Well, because Elizabeth is Elizabeth, she puts on that paper bag, and she starts out after that dragon. She outsmarts the dragon, and of course rescues Ronald. And all that Ronald has to say when he's being rescued is, well, you don't look like a princess, and you smell, and you're wearing a paper bag. And of course Elizabeth looks at Ronald, and again, I think the wooden frog is probably a good sound for Ronald, and says, well, you may be a prince, but you're really a bum. and they didn't get married after all. So if you add those sound effects, that again reinforces the character, and you can have fun with that. Coyote steals a blanket is a Ute tale, and I love this story because it captures everything that I like about Coyote. He is a trickster, and he usually is kind of selfish, but there's something about him you kind of like. In this particular story, even though Bluebird comes and tells him, don't go to that sacred place that all the blankets cover rocks. You must not take those blankets. Well, of course, knowing Coyote, that's exactly what he does. He steals a blanket. And he's thinking of how his friends are going to be so excited to see his new blanket. He puts it around his neck, and off he's running until he hears and what happens, of course, is the rock whose blanket he has stolen has come to claim it. And the gyro is really a great sound here because you can make it start very slowly. And then, of course, as it picks up momentum, and of course in the story that's exactly what happens. And finally, it rolls right over Coyote's tail. And of course, in true fashion, Bluebird comes down and whirs away the rock and saves Coyote. But you add that element of suspense by making that whole chase scene a little more fun. So now we get to the Thunder Cube. When can you use that? Well, the retelling of Goldie and the Three Hares is one of my favorite variations of Goldie and the Three Bears. If you know that story, what happens in that story, you have this really big Goldilocks, and she stumbles into the Three Hares' rabbit hole. She falls down the rabbit hole. And of course, she's so big, she blocks it, and they're kind of trapped with this big girl in their house. And because the entrance of Goldilocks is kind of sudden, you can add, well, you could certainly use the tonal drum, that would work as well. But adding the Thunder Cube gives the whole idea. These words that you see in the PowerPoint are the words that are taken from the author's idea of the sound. So you wouldn't say them, you would just play the Thunder Cube. And then describe what happens to those poor Three Hares. And again, this is a fun story that audiences really enjoy. Okay, so there is a handout about kazoos too. And as I've already said before, this is the one thing that you could take away from this workshop and introduce right into your storytelling today. Usually when I introduce it, as the handout indicates, we talk about the kazoo. You're going to hum, you don't blow. Inevitably, I'll have a student who is blowing away, and I said, you don't blow, you hum. And finally, when that kicks in, they get the idea. Their friends are doing something. So when we do this as a group, we always start with a musical scale. And depending on the talents of my class, sometimes that's in tune and sometimes it's not. The next thing I have them do is think of the tune of Mary Had a Little Lamb and just play that. But probably what they like doing most is using verse sound effects, because again, in the palm of your hand, you have a whole orchestra It's just based on your ability to hum and make interesting sounds. So I usually have them show me the sound of a fast sports car. It might come out like that, or as I told you before, maybe my story has a police siren in it. And if you tell folk tales with mosquitoes, what would be better than, or you can make it your mosquito sound a little bit lower. Then going back to what we learned about classical music and the idea of increasing your spatial understanding and mathematical skills. For fun, I told my students, well, I want you to think of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And of course, they look at me like, what? And I said, you really know the beginning. You've heard this. You've heard it in scores and perhaps set to cartoons. And when I play it, they immediately recognize it. And of course, we play around of that. But don't take my word for it. What I'd like us to do is take a listen to this kazoo choir. You just hand out some kazoos and let them have fun. So yes, there are really kazoo choirs. If you wondered about that before, and you don't have to have any prior experience, you just need to get out your kazoo and start blowing, and voila, you have a choir. Or again, a great sound effect. Okay, so often when I talk about these resources, people say, well, where do you get those? So this last slide is designed to give you that information. So Amazon.com is the best place to shop for handbells and kazoos. The handbell set that I have, again, the basic set is 8 bells. You can get the extension that adds a chromatic scale as well. The kazoos, I would again have you invest in the Horner kazoos, the ones like I showed you. They again are relatively inexpensive, but their structure is pretty good and they hold up well. Don't get the ones that you can give out for Halloween or give as birthday prizes. Those are not quite so good. Now, if you're interested in finding multicultural instruments like the seed pod, or I didn't show you this, the seed bracelet, um, go to Rhythm Band. It's just called Rhythm Band. They have a selection of stir xylophones. They also have boom whackers. And all you have to do is type in, and you can see the various instruments that they have. One other instrument that I did not show you is the tick-tock. And this is a fun one to use. When you have a clicking, a ticking tock, I should click a ticking clock, in the Cinderella stories, when you have the countdown to midnight, the tick-tock works really well. Okay, so let me stop sharing at this point, and let's address any questions that you have, or any experiences you'd like to share.
So Trudy, the one question that came up during your workshop was, do you have a list of all the instruments that you happen to mention today?
I do in the PowerPoint, but I can, if anyone wants the list of things I've mentioned, I can send it to them. My email is at the very top of the chat. You can't see that anymore.
Right. We'll have to put your email in again, because some people that came late, I found out through the chat that if you come in after something's been shared on the chat, you don't get to see it.
Okay.
So,
let me go ahead and add that right now.
Yeah, we'll do email, and then we'll share those documents again. Those were the two things that came up during the workshop. So, and we do have time. So let's see.
Oh, I think that just went to Eldrina. Let me try it again.
That's to everyone. So yeah, so if somebody else has a comment now or a question, if you'll just be mindful, and when you've finished your question or comment, if you'll mute yourself, because if too many people are unmuted at the same time, the sound gets a little iffy. So I'll let y'all ask questions and comments, and I'll mute myself, and I'll let you know when. We've still got about 30 minutes, so we have lots of time to share and ask questions. And Dr. Hanson, if you have anything else you want to share, just wave at me, and I'll let everybody quiet down again, and then we'll do that. And I'll come back on towards the end and wrap it up. So.
I can show you one other thing that I have back here in the background. If you know me, you know that I'm a Peanuts fan, particularly of Snoopy. And a couple years ago, the Sneaky Little Beagle was released. And as you can tell, it's set to the tune of that you'll recognize, Itsy Bitsy Spider. The sneaky little beagle comes out at Halloween. No one knows for certain where he might be seen. And so I adapted this story in the same way that I did the night before Halloween, and added musical cues. I would sing the story, and then the audience would add in the different sound effects that I put into the story sequence for them. But this is really a fun adaptation, since we're getting ready for Halloween, the Sneaky Little Beagle.
Can I talk? I don't know if I'm allowed to talk.
You're allowed to talk.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention, I love all the instruments and all the ideas you're giving. Thank you so much. One of the stories I do like to use so many of those instruments with is Rabbit's Hole, which is an African tale, right? And I heard Heather Force tell her version of it and sing her version of it. But when you think about it, that instrument that
Stir xylophone?
Yes. If you go real slow, slower, it's a caterpillar crawling out of its hole, right? And then I use in the same story, the thunder stick is the monster in the story. And just like you said, the kids are each holding their instruments and love that. So you could use a lot of those with that. I just wanted to share that with you. Very easy.
Great idea. It's a great story too. Yeah. Anybody else have favorite sounds that they add to their stories?
I had a question.
Okay.
Do you have a list of all the books that are really adaptive to use music with, along with?
Well, I can generate one. What I do, I find stories that I like. And often those stories have those kind of elements that I can use the language of sound with. And so I don't have a list that I've generated. I have a list of folk tales I always make my students aware of. But I'm happy if you'll email me, I'll send you the stories that I use sound with. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Along the same lines, the stories that you cited, the about
Kanehito and
books. Yes.
yes.
Are those are all available through
Yes.
any book vendor?
Right.
Just
Yeah, all of those are readily available, and some of them are, have been in many editions. But yeah, all of these are readily available. Some in paperback, some in hardback. And often when I'm looking for stories, I read folk tales from all over because that's how I learn about culture. You can find out what a culture values from their folklore. And so when I read the story, I think of the language, I think of sounds that would help me tell the story, and then that becomes part of the way that I perform it. Not every story has to have these sound effects, but I find my audience, again, no matter what age, enjoys that. It's something that creates an impression and helps them remember the story, just like the story of Alice McGill that I referred to.
My daughter does a lot of storytelling, but she's a music teacher trained in Kodai, and she uses a lot of body percussion and sound effects with
using your hands. Yes.
Yes.
Well, one of the assignments I do at the end of our class for fun is story raps. And so I give the students, it's a story rap that's already been written. It's taken from several different sources. I put them into groups of 4, and then they have to come up with the beat that they want to use. And so somebody is doing the beat sound while the other person is doing the rhythm of the language. And they have a lot of fun with that. So I can imagine your daughter has fun doing that with the body sounds you can make.
Well, I want to thank you, Trudy. This is Trina. And for everybody that hasn't known Dr. Hanson as long as I have, she has been a wonderful asset to our area and to the storytellers of the High Plains that we both started long time ago. And Dr. Hanson has always been faithful to make sure that we have meetings, even though it's sometimes less than a handful that show up, but she always dedicates herself to letting us know that we're meeting. And I have witnessed so much of her teaching of the undergraduates and the graduate students, and getting to hear, because I'm right here by WT, I get to attend a lot of the festivals, and I have been blessed by all of the featured tellers that have come through, and I've taken part in their workshops, and WT has done all of that free of charge. And so Dr. Hanson has been a wonderful asset to the world of storytelling. And just watching her teach the I guess the upcoming generations, I hope that some of them that go on to do other things, that they'll come back to storytelling maybe as a profession further down the line. And so she's already put out a lot of seeds of storytellers out there. So I thank you, Dr. Hanson. Thank you, my friend Trudy Hanson. You're fantastic.
Thank you, Drina. Drina is a great friend too. She's been one of our featured tellers, one of my students' all-time favorites, and we love having her visit campus and share her wonderful gift of storytelling with us. Yeah, that has been great.
Right.
So, oh, and for all of you Tejas Storytelling members, on my midterm exam, there is a question about the Tejas Storytelling Festival. So if you hadn't thought about it before, it's on my midterm exam.
Well, Dr. Hanson, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
And I hope I get the name right, but I think it comes from Aliyah Sophia. And the question is, any suggestion on how to use maracas in a story?
Oh, yes. In one of the stories, Goldilocks and the Three Squares, it's a version of the Goldilocks story that's math-oriented. And maracas fit in right there because there's, when it talks about the 3 different kinds of food, there's different kinds of macaroni. And so the maracas I use for that. That's the sound that I use for that. Now, of course, you can just use maracas as the sound that you make throughout your story, especially if it's one that lends itself culturally to that. So you can start, when you start, just like we learned the rhythms, taka, taka, stop, stop, you can start your story with your maracas and then give your storytelling frame and then bring them back in if they're tied to a character.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I do want to tell another little piece of housekeeping. So apparently, if you're logged on and watching this workshop via Zoom on your telephone, your cell phone, the downloads for the documents are not coming through to you on the chat. So if you do see Dr. Hanson's email address, Dr. Hanson, would it be okay if they emailed you and asked you
Oh, yes.
for handouts as well?
Yeah, I'll send those as attachments. That's easy to do. Yeah.
So if if you did not get a link to the downloads, and so send Dr. Hanson an email and request those downloads and a list of instruments and whatever. And thank you for that extra mile that you're going, Dr. Hanson, to do all that for us.
Oh, I love doing that. Like Drina says, we want to spread the joy of storytelling, and if you get just one idea, that brings joy to me. I will mention our storytelling festival that we usually hold in May. Right now is postponed. Probably we won't be able to hold it in 2021, but hopefully we'll be back the next year. Joe Hayes was going to be our featured teller in 2020, and of course our campus closed, and as things stand now, we can't have public gatherings of more than 10 people on campus, and so that makes having an in-person storytelling festival impossible. So I'm so glad that Tejas was inventive and took the leap to do a virtual workshop for us. We might pursue that too. As Drina says, we asked for funding from our guest speaker series to fund our guest teller, and we give it as a gift to the community. There are no costs involved for them. Our department pays the fee and travel costs for the teller. And of course the students get the experience of having a workshop with a really gifted teller. It makes a lifelong impression on them. And so we hope to continue to do that whenever we're out of the world of Corona.
Hi, can I ask something?
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry, my name is not Alia. That's my daughter, actually. Sorry. Yeah, I'm actually watching from Malaysia.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Right.
welcome.
So, and here is 3 o'clock in the morning, and like but I like to say something like I would like to thank you for your generosity in all this. It has really been an eye opener, especially in the wee hours in the morning. So yeah, and if I can just share, somebody shared with me. So since because there's so much love here, so maybe some of you knows already, but I'm just gonna share it anyway. Uh, this one is a plastic bottle used to put milk in it. So we put rice, rice,
Yes.
yeah, and oh gosh, now it's all over the place. Okay, and the sound like this, I'm not sure you can hear it.
Yes, it's like a rain stick.
Yeah. Ah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah, and they use it for people. We use it for the sound of sea, the waves crashing or something like that. Right. The instrument just now. What's inside it?
Uh, this has seeds in it. The rain
Oh,
stick.
seeds.
Yeah.
Cool. And another one. You guys know coconut shells. Yeah. Somebody use it for. This is a coconut shell, like a horse galloping or something.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I'm still using it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. 3 o'clock. You are a true believer.
So tell us your name since we spoke your daughter's name.
Yeah, my name is Nor Azhar.
Nora
Nor
Azhar.
Azhar. I'm gonna like change it now.
Well, welcome to Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you guys. Well done, Tejas.
Well, and if anybody has any more questions, go ahead and let us know. We do have about 15 minutes left. Before, like, if we've got a little minute, I want to remind you that at 5 o'clock, we have a social hour with Elizabeth Ellis and Darcy Tucker. And Elizabeth did have a little bit of trouble with her computer, so hopefully she'll be there. And then at 6 o'clock, we have our evening concert. And the featured teller on our evening concert is Shauna Lee Cumbers. Then we also have Bernadette Neeson, Newt Rary, Davey Keith, and our MC is Kathy Palmer. So, and we'll also have our ASL interpreters, Libby Tipton and Joel Hill. And so we have two tech people, Dean Keith and Kim Lehman, on that concert. So there's lots of hands behind the scenes to make this happen and make this work. So I want to thank every single one of you for coming and joining us from all over the world. I love this. And if there's no more questions for Dr. Hanson, maybe we just do a shout out with our name and where we're from. And I know we're storytellers, but to include everybody, those two things only. And then we'll see how much time we have left. So my name is Shayne, and I'm from Dallas, Texas.
I'm Eldrina Duma, and I'm from the Amarillo Canyon, Texas area up in the Panhandle.
I'm Sue Billich from Austin, Texas.
I'm Venora Lago from Gretna, Louisiana.
I'm Jay McLaughlin from Denton, Texas.
And I am Canute Rary from my bedroom. Western North Carolina.
Wow.
I'm Margot Miles. I'm from Vallejo, California.
Very good.
Shayne from Dallas, Texas.
So we just chat.
Tony.
Oh, sorry, Donna. Dudinsky. I'm so bad. Dudinsky, and lives in Toronto, Canada.
I'm Tony Mooney from Prescott, Arizona.
I'm Sue Kuntz, and I'm from Bulverde, Texas, which is just north of San Antonio.
I'm Leona Hofsberg, and I'm from Houston, but I used to come from California, so.
I'm Leslie Bowie, and I'm from Roswell, Texas.
I'm Susan Stambrook Shanti from Austin, Texas.
And remember, guys, after you've said your name and town, mute yourselves again so we don't get a lot of feedback.
Yeah. My name.
Oh.
Brooke, go ahead.
My name is Brooke, and I'm from just south of Austin.
Well,
Gwen Caldwell.
I'm Walter Boyd, and I'm from Conroe, Texas.
I'm DAVID, and I'm from Cedar Hill, Texas.
Gwen Caldwell from Richardson, Texas.
Nur Azhar from Malaysia.
I'll say my name again because you might not have heard it. Georgia Acola from Brooklyn, New York.
Thanks for joining us for the time change. I always have to remind myself Central Eastern Time, so glad you joined us.
Marty Hensley from Springfield, Missouri.
Janet Mickle Burton from Richardson, Texas, north of Dallas.
This is Jay, and I'm going to sign out and get ready for the next thing. Thank you all. Thank you for the workshop. Thank you, everybody who helped with it. And it was great to see everybody else. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jay. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thanks to everybody for saying your name and your state who did. And those that don't have a microphone or are a little shy, that's okay. We love listeners just as much as we love talkers. So, Dr. Hanson, do you have any closing words or thoughts or anything for us? Or does anybody have a question before we sign off here? We're ending up a little bit early. That's okay.
Yes, that's okay. I always start out every storytelling class that I teach with a quote that Lewis Carroll said. He said, "You should think of stories as a love gift." So you give a story, you don't tell your audience what the story means, you give it as a gift. So this has been my gift to you today, and I hope that you go forth and tell stories.
That's awesome.
One last Vivica, or Rebecca, that rhymes with Rebecca, so I hope I did that okay, from Royce City, Texas. So welcome. Yeah, and Dr. Hanson, there's lots of good kudos on the chat about loving the workshop, always energizes to apply what I've learned. Thank you for your gift. Glad to be here. Thanks for doing this. Lots of very informative. you can use maracas with a story called Baby Rattlesnake.
Yes.
That's fun.
That's Shohei's story. That's great. Yeah.
So do y'all have rattlesnakes in Malaysia? No, so that's a Texas thing.
Yeah, but the snakes here are also quite nasty. So yeah.
And Trophine Hickman from Cedar Hill is also here, and somebody said, can't wait to try some of the things that I learned today. So yay!
Good.
Thank y'all to everybody. We appreciate it so much.
Dr. Hanson, is it possible to take your class online or by Zoom at the university that you teach?
Right now, it's not offered online, but I can. We have certainly made some changes because I really like to have in-person presentations. Right now, it's taught as a hybrid, so my students come once a week, and then the rest of the class is online on the other day of the week, but it's not totally online yet.
Where are you located again?
In Canyon, Texas. It's south of Amarillo. And West Texas A&M University is part of the Texas A&M system. But we don't consider ourselves Aggies. We are Buffaloes.
Okay, all right. My daughter goes to A&M. It's
great school. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll have to look it up and come to special events or something.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
All right. Well, any more questions? Sue, you got one, or are you just waving? Trophy's just waving. Okay, going once, going twice, going 3 times. Thank you again. Please, if you're welcome to Dr. Hanson. Well, I'm sorry, my screen started flashing and I got lost. Not thanks and your goodbye.
Yes.
So we appreciate you, Dr. Hanson, so much for being here today with us online. You did a great job.
Thank you for your help, everybody. Brooks and David and Jane. Thank you.
We'll see you, Trudy. Bye.
Bye, Trina.
Eldrina.